again, I'm Margaret Aycock, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, the painting process and why I paint. This is probably most appropriate for artist groups, perhaps, because I'm actually going to talk a little bit about technical things. I started painting, started drawing when I was very young, probably around 5 or so. I grew up in the Adirondack Mountains of New York, and my dad ran the food service for it was a camp, Adirondack Woodcraft Camp, and it was a camp for boys, but as a little girl, that's where I lived, and I would spend a lot of time with the camp counselor who was in charge of the art room. So I would get my own little spot and would start drawing and stuff there. So that's really how I began my work, and it grew from drawing little chipmunks and turtles and stuff like that to a lot of other things. Now I paint portraits and landscape and still life and just about anything that strikes my fancy. And normally I would probably have at this point a PowerPoint to show you of my work, and I would probably also have everything else on PowerPoint, which I don't have yet, but I do have the things that I will put on PowerPoint, and that will be taken from this book. So this is the book that I just finished writing, and it shows the process from beginning to end on painting a still life. So I will just kind of go through a couple things here. So I'll hold this up so you can see it. So I would start by talking about some of the tools that you use, and I would show a picture of the different tools and explain the uses. And in my book I have a lot of why I choose what I choose, and I'm also very frugal. For those who know me know that that's true. And so I have a lot of little tips and tricks to keep the cost of painting down. And I'm also an environmentalist, so I have a lot of tips like that too. So anyway, so then I would move to gathering your subjects. What do you choose to paint and how you choose to create your composition. And this is one of the compositions that I have in the book, and I show you several different ways that you can arrange the same objects. And here's just a little snippet. There's four little boxes down below that show you different ways you can light your still life and different ways that you can view your still life from above, from either side, because there's often not any real wrong answers. Well, there probably is, but so then I show you how to build a few tools, common tools that I use all the time, and that is like a viewfinder for one, and then I show you, a little viewfinder and how to build it. It's not really that difficult. And then I start with the painting process, which for me, for this particular painting, began with a wash, and not all my paintings begin with a wash, but most of them do. And then an abstract design, which I'll talk to them a lot about that. And I probably will go in a little bit about measuring. For me, measuring was one of those things that, it just seemed so easy once I learned it. And I thought, well, why don't they teach this in schools? They're just, I went to college to study art. They never taught me anything like this. So there are some really, really good tools that I learned from taking private lessons as an adult that I have in my book. So one of those is measuring, and I will explain that, but may not go into great detail because it's a little bit of a difficult concept. And I also have a couple little tricks on measuring that I'll talk about. And using your painting tools, painting brush for something other than painting with. The next step after wash, after the abstract, is actually kind of designing your composition. And everything is done very lightly with turpentine and oil so that it can always be erased. Oil is a very, very forgiving medium. And then I'll talk about the block in. I don't know, I'm hoping you can see these things, but maybe you can't. But I'll then talk about blocking things in. And I'm also going to talk about more than one way to get something done. And I paint pretty opaquely usually, except when I'm painting flowers, and then some of those watercolor lessons that I had years ago kick in. So I do a little bit of the transparent stuff, a little bit of the glazing, and also opaque painting. And we'll talk a lot about color. So there's the other stuff they never taught me in college. I don't know why I spent my money, but anyway. And I will spend some time talking about learning how to see. And that is, I think as an artist, that is one of the main things, one of the main aha moments that I've ever had, is learning to see. And I remember still coming home from one of my lessons when I was taking lessons, and the teacher would always talk about, you know, this is a little bit more orange, this is a little bit more gray, and I was just nodding my head and saying, okay, lady, I'll take your word for it because I'm not seeing it. And then coming home one day on the road, I looked down and I could see, you know, in my mind, road is supposed to be gray. So roads are gray, trees are brown. And that particular day, the road was blue and the road was pink. And it was like a bluish purple wherever there were shadows that came across it. It was bright pink wherever there were no shadows. And I thought, that's what she's talking about. Anyway, that stuff is hard to teach, but it happens through the process. All of a sudden, one day you think, that's what it is. But I'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll talk about finishing up, and that's when you do all the detail. It's you go from spaces and shapes at the very beginning, a lot of negative painting, and end up with the detail stuff in the end. And that's what I'll talk about. And that is assuming I'm talking to a group of artists that I can share some of these techniques to. If I'm not talking to artists, I'll probably talk more just about my own work and do a PowerPoint and show some of my pieces and talk a little bit more about why I paint or why I painted this particular piece or that particular piece. But there you go.